God bless you for coming back. Try not to repeat from what we talked about this morning. But what I wanted to do was, and this session's not as long, but I did want to talk to you guys about how I found Washington to work, or rather sometimes not to work. But Michael mentioned that I spent a lot of years in the diplomatic service, and of all my years there, I avoided Washington. I spent most of my time in Africa on the ground. And I had this, I just did not want to be in Washington because I figured it would be all tied up in red tape, bureaucratic, dysfunctional, slow, indecisive. And oh my gosh, did I ever pay for that? Because it was much, much worse than I had ever imagined. So I want to go through some of the fundamentals with you guys. And then I want to give you some case examples, some case studies of some of the things I'm going to talk to you about. And then we'll open it up for your comments and discussions. And I said this morning, please feel free absolutely to disagree with me. You know, I don't have a fragile ego, so go to it. Okay, fundamentally, the dynamic forces in Washington are just like they are amongst a group of people. But what we're talking about here are institutions. And here are the key ones that are engaged on almost every single issue. Obviously, the White House and the president, as represented in most of the back and forth by the National Security Council. So that's kind of at the top of it. Then there are the executive agencies like the Department of Defense, like the Department of State, and others, whether they're independent, like the FBI, or tied, they are called the executive agencies. Then there's Congress, and people think often of Congress as a branch of government, but they are very, very not. They are absolutely the two branches. Oftentimes, the House of Representatives looks at the Senate as the enemy, even though they're different parties, but they are absolutely very different in anything, any important event. Then Washington is full of lobbyists. You know, you hear and read in the media about the K Street lobbyists. It is real, true. Any kind of cause you can imagine, there is a lobby group, probably, that will be engaging on their behalf, not just with members of Congress, but also with the executive agencies and with the White House. Then there are think tanks. Does anybody want to give me what you think a definition is of a think tank? What would you say is a think tank? Because there's a pretty simple definition. A think tank is basically a university without students. That the faculty is all there doing researching on various aspects of this, that, or the other, but there are no students there. So they produce an awful lot of papers. And in Washington, there's something like 260 think tanks. So on any subject, you can get any number of papers on any day and on taking any point of view. Then there is what we call civil society. And civil society has become much more influential in recent years. And these are your NGOs, non-governmental organizations, like CARE, World Food Program, others. There's religious members of civil society who represent various religious organizations. And a lot of them tend to be single issue, like starvation in the Sahel. And God bless each and every one of these single issue NGOs, but they can be an incredible pain because they see the entire world through that single issue. So our relations, with example, with China can be very complicated, A to Z. But from their point of view, they only see letter J, for example, and every single thing is tied up to that. So they would come and see me, and I would have to just kind of bite my tongue, and they'd be talking about, the issue of, I'll give you a really good example of child labor on cocoa plantations in the Ivory Coast and Cote d'Ivoire. I mean, for them, that was the most important issue in the world. Never mind all the other important things going on with Cote d'Ivoire, but if they did not do and fight against child labor on the cocoa plantations strongly enough, then we should absolutely blow up our entire relations with the country of Cote d'Ivoire. And there are these organizations for every single issue you can think of. You can imagine that on Wednesday, somebody comes in on one, and then Thursday, somebody comes in taking the absolutely opposite point of view on that. So very difficult in the mix. Then, of course, there's business. Business has tremendous interests around the country, around the world, and they are there, and they're very much into the policymaking equation in Washington. With the last administration, the media was extremely important and influential. And with the last administration, that was Fox News, basically. The White House did not care about, if it was on MSNBC, CNN, no problem. But my gosh, if Fox News, criticized the State Department on something, watch out, because the president would be on the phone to Secretary of State Pompeo, and then the trouble would roll downhill from there. With this administration, maybe it'll be MSNBC, we'll see. But the media is just incredibly, incredibly important. And then foreign governments. Just about every major foreign government has hired at least one lobby group in Washington to lobby on their behalf. You can think of some countries that have incredible influence in Washington on their own. Israel, Egypt, traditionally, United Kingdom, Canada, relations with Mexico. So what they say on some issues really, really matters. So you put all of these forces together, and they all come in on various types of the important issues of the day, whether they're domestic or international. Of course, I know the international side better. And that's what leads to the dysfunction or the function. As I mentioned, within the Congress itself, even on the same side, incredibly, incredibly difficult and incredibly complicated. And you would see this play out. For example, some of them, like I'm sure Dean Sacco's aware, and from but we would have to do what's called congressional testimony. And congressional testimony, you've seen this on TV, no doubt, where somebody is sitting there in front of a Senate or a House panel, and they're being pummeled, absolutely just being taken to the cleaners. And the congressional testimony is really interesting. I actually ended up having a lot of fun with that, because at the first I was very intimidated. The thought that you're going to go in there and sit and they fix it up so you're sitting down there and they're all above you and peering down. But it's actually kabuki theater, because you go through this exercise where you get 5 minutes to read a statement. It goes into the congressional congressional record. You're on TV, and there's an audience, and usually the people who show up for this are some of these other interested groups. So if somebody's there listening to congressional testimony, they're there with an agenda. And you do your 5 minutes, and all of the members, starting with the most senior of the ruling party and then moving on, they all have 3 minutes to question you. And so you think, you would think that there'd be some kind of consistency, at least from your point of view. But there cannot be, because in most of these testimonies, among the members of Congress who are there to question you, and it can be like an inquisition, because they usually do the testimony when they're really upset with the administration about some issue. And then the administration will find a scapegoat to send off to Congress to get beaten up on. And, because the administration or the members of Congress often were very unhappy with the president's policy on Africa, they would very often have these hearings, and Secretary of State would say, oh, send Tibor, he can deal with that. But what happens is, okay, you have the members of Congress there, and they themselves disagree vehemently with each other. So the first questioner may be a Democrat from California, who certainly will have a certain point of view, and he or she will lead a very embarrassing, question. I mean, I'll never forget my very first one. After becoming assistant secretary, the very first question I got, Senator Menendez, who absolutely detested President Trump. So he didn't, it's not that he hated me, it's just that I was there representing the administration. And he said, Mr. Assistant Secretary, how do you defend the fact that your president referred to your countries of responsibility as S-hole countries? There's no easy way to answer a question like that. There's really no easy way to do it. But then you figure something out. This is all going into the congressional record. They're making these statements for the congressional record and for their constituents. So your job, it's not to get into an argument with them. Your job is to let them make their statement, let them perform for their constituents, and then answer a question you're comfortable answering that has some relation to what they asked you. And they know they only have 3 minutes. So you don't want to make them look like an idiot because they will not forgive you. And also they pass your budget. But you give them a little bit of respect. So you go ahead and you answer the question you want to answer. You go through that, and then they get, the next round. Then they can come back, and once their 3 minutes are gone, the chair will move on to the next person. So, after a couple of these sessions, I actually started having some fun with them. And that's one part of the job that I'm actually going to miss. Now, deciding on issues in Washington, there's 2 ways to do this. Bottom up, top down. Most of these things are decided bottom up. And what that means, so there's a live issue out there. And first of all, the agency that's responsible, it's a law enforcement issue, say a border issue, foreign policy issue, the agency that's responsible has to come up with a unified position, which sounds like it's easy, but it's not. In the State Department, there are so many bureaus that are responsible for so many things that any single issue will have a whole number of different offices that are responsible for it, and they will often disagree. So you have people at the low level get together, meeting after meeting, and they hash out some kind of a compromise that then the Secretary of State may or may not agree to. And then other agencies that are involved with that also get into that. And if the agencies agree, that's fine, then that kind of goes up to the White House. If the agencies don't agree on this, then it goes to the National Security Council, whose job it is to coordinate policies amongst the various government agencies. So, when it gets to that step, that's great. Then it goes to the president. Most of the time, the president will buy off on it. And there you have your policy on whatever you want on, buying bananas from Panama, whatever. That's great. But with the Trump administration, as I said this morning, President Trump was kind of a unique president in my experience out of 7 different administrations. With the Trump administration, that often did not work because the bureaucratic process would work itself through, the usual Washington levers. Everybody involved would have their input. You come up with, basically you're making sausage. You come up with the sausage, and then the president, on a whim says, no, I don't like that. I want it to be something different. And then everything gets thrown out and everybody goes crazy and, scuttling around, and then you come up with a totally different policy. And unfortunately, you get most administrations, it works fairly smoothly, but with the Trump administration, time after time after time, the president would involve himself in an issue, and you're going this way, and then all of a sudden he says, no, go that way. So, that was very, very, very difficult. You think, you talk about secretary of this, secretary of that, members of Congress, senator this, senator that, head of NASA. But I'll tell you guys a little secret. Washington is not run by those people. Washington is actually run by people that are not much older than you guys. and they're staffers. They're called staffers. And any place in Washington you go to, it's full of young people, 20s, early 30s. Used to be a very undiverse group. Used to be mostly white males. Now it's become much more diverse in the point of view of males and females, but still not very diverse when it comes to African Americans, Latinos, other hyphenated Americans. But these are the folks that actually produce all of the material for their, their superiors, for the member of Congress, for the senator. So they're the key. I found that I could actually get so much more done by dealing with the staffers than trying to deal with the member. So I could deal with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee staff, or I could deal with the National Security Council staff, or other staffers of the president, because they're the ones who really understand everything. They're the ones who understand the issues. I mean, you have to remember, the main task that members of Congress have, realistically speaking, is raising money to get reelected. So they just don't have the bandwidth, they don't have the time to get really into issues, to the details that are required to write a bill, unless they are passionate about that particular issue. Now, to my misfortune, somebody like Senator Menendez was passionate about Africa. So he often knew the issues as well as I did. That was because of a personal interest in this. But these other massive amounts of work, these massive bills that you guys read about, that is all done by the staff. And even during some of these congressional hearings, where the members are there to make themselves look good to their constituents, or to make you look stupid in the eyes of the press, so they can make the administration look stupid, the questions are all done by the staff. And all they're doing is reading them. And it's the same for somebody like my boss. I mean, my boss, Secretary Pompeo, was responsible for 200 and some countries in the world. And in each of those countries, there were any number of major issues. Do you think any human being can reasonably be familiar with, the details of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam and the differences that there are between Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt on negotiating the dam? Of course not. So the staff, again, would prepare what's called talking points for Secretary Pompeo, and he would get President Sisi of Egypt on the phone. And 5 minutes before his conversation, he would literally read through the points. And those of you, and then I hear the phone call afterwards, and those are the points he goes through. So again, if you want to look and see who really runs Washington, it is the staff. If you, the students, if you really want an influential position after you leave university, go for one of the staff jobs on Capitol Hill or in one of the agencies, through an internship, because then you can really, as I say, put your oar in the water. If you have the kind of intellectual stamina for those kind of details, and go with that. Now, what I would like to do is go through some of the cases to show you how Washington reacted to a certain issue or a challenge. In a couple of these, Washington was united, and it was fairly easy to get stuff done. In a couple of them, Washington was absolutely disunited, and it was incredibly difficult to achieve any kind of a success. So the first one I want to start with, last November, on a Thursday afternoon in the West African country of Niger, where there was an American missionary who had lived there for a long time. He felt very secure because he spoke the language. He was well known to the local people. But a armed gang of kidnappers came across the border from Nigeria, which was nearby. It was about 10 miles away, kidnapped him and took him back into Nigeria. And let it be known that they wanted a ransom of $20 million for his release. As I said to the group this morning, one of President Trump's personal passions was the safety of Americans hostages overseas. So when embassy in Niamey, Niger, our embassy heard from the family, of course, notified Washington. It comes into us in the Bureau of African Affairs. We notify the Secretary of State's office, and then we notify another office, which is the President's Special Envoy for Hostage Affairs, who's responsible uniquely for hostages. You also immediately notify the White House through the National Security Council, and this all happened on Thursday night. President Trump got the news Friday morning, and within 20 minutes, he had talked to the Secretary of Defense, the Secretary of State, and within 20 minutes, he gave the go-ahead to mount a rescue operation with a SEAL team out of Europe. We were charged on our side. They were getting their mission ready. We were charged on our side to get the permission of the Nigerian government for a US military team to actually go in on the ground, land in Nigeria to rescue the hostage. Thanks to telephone conversations that the kidnappers were having, there was an exact pinpoint of where the hostage was being held. We were very afraid that the kidnappers would end up selling him to a terrorist organization affiliated with Al-Qaeda that was operating in the area, because for Al-Qaeda, an American hostage is extremely valuable, and Al-Qaeda has an awful lot of money. Now, it took the military about 8 hours to get the SEAL team ready to go. They obviously have to do a lot of research and, but our misfortune was that our ambassador to Nigeria happened to be on home leave vacation in the States, up in the mountains of Vermont. So we were having to deal with her deputy. Her deputy, thankfully, was well plugged into the Nigerian government, very quickly got in touch with the Nigerian presidency. And the Nigerian presidency, a bureaucratic Byzantine organization itself, was actually doing its best to get permission from President Buhari of Nigeria to go with the operation. We were waiting for their decision. The SEAL team's ready to go. They get in the plane, and the plane takes off. Plane's on its way to Nigeria. It's about a 5-hour flight from where they took off. And they have to have the go instructions within a certain period of time. If they do not, then the plane has to turn around. Now, as I said, here was the neat thing. On the Washington side, everything went boom, 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 which very, very rarely. State Department, Department of Defense, National Security Council, White House, were all in favor of rescuing the hostage. Nobody said, well, no, wait a minute, what happened with the Iranian hostages? And nobody said that. With this group, everybody said, yes, we're going to go. Key members of Congress were notified, and they also said absolutely. Key members of the media were notified, and they were told absolutely shut up and do not break this story, and they cooperated. As everybody thinks there's a huge war between the media and the government. There is, but there are certain issues where everybody's going to cooperate. So the plane's in the air. They are getting close to their turnaround point. And we are still getting nothing out of the Nigerian presidency. The plane hits its 1 minute time, where within 1 minute there has to be a decision. We are asked by the Department of Defense, will you, State Department, authorize the mission to go ahead, even if the Nigerians don't approve? So my deputy and I look at each other and you say to yourself, so what can go wrong? Oh, but we tell they have the radio to the plane, everybody's communicating, and we say to them, okay, if the Nigerian government does not give its go-ahead, we authorize the mission to go forward. At that minute, thank God, we get a message from Abuja. Our charge d'affaires, our chief of mission at the time, says that she had just gotten word that President Buhari of Nigeria approves the mission. What was holding it up was the president wanted to do it with a signed written memorandum, and he was unhappy with the first draft of the memorandum, so he wanted it redone so that it would be properly authorized. But we get the mission, the SEALs land in Niger, they cross the border into Nigeria, they kill all the bad guys, bring back the missionary. You would think that the Nigerians would be unhappy with that. They were not. The Nigerian people were elated. The people who got the most grief out of that was the Nigerian government, because Nigeria has had a scourge of kidnappings. And the people of Nigeria said, look at this. One American gets kidnapped and they send their armed forces in to release him. And every day, hundreds of Nigerian citizens are kidnapped. But you, President Buhari, is not doing anything to save them. So, that really good for the United States. Kidnappings continue to be a problem in Nigeria. All right, another example. Again, most of Washington worked together, but not completely. This again is a kind of a security issue. There's a convicted terrorist, very, very dangerous guy whose prison sentence is coming to an end. He was not a US citizen, but he was a green card holder. And you don't know, a green card holder is somebody who is eligible to stay in the United States while they decide whether or not to apply for US citizenship. This guy's prison sentence was coming to an end, and there was no reason any longer to hold him in prison. But all of our law enforcement believed that he would constitute a grave threat to the security of the United States of America. I don't want to go into details, but he had all kinds of talents, none of which were really good for the American people. So the Department of Justice goes to the White House and says, we desperately want this person out of the country. So the White House calls a meeting of all of the agencies involved, and they said, we need to find a place that will take this person in. And they look at the State Department. So Secretary of State says to all of us, the assistant secretaries for the various parts of the world, is go out to all of your embassies, and we need to identify a country that is willing to take this individual when they are let out of jail. So here's my deal. I have to go to all of my embassies and tell my ambassadors to call on their host country governments and say, Mr. President, Madam President, Prime Minister, whatever, would you be willing to take a citizen of, I'm not going to say the country, but a citizen of such and such a country who is in prison in the United States and who will be released, but it is not safe to keep him in the United States, so would you take him in your country? What a deal. I mean, if any of you think that that's a good deal, well, to no surprise of anyone, no one stepped forward. Not our very good friends Israel, not our very good friend Egypt. Nobody, even the most despicable dictatorship did not step forward to say, yeah, we'll take him. And we let the country know that you would be doing a huge favor to the United States of America if you take this individual. Nobody stepped forward. Well, that was not good enough for the Secretary of State. It was not good enough for the White House. So basically, having the misfortune of having the most number of countries in my portfolio, because I had 47 of them, they said, Tibor, surely amongst all of your countries, you can find somebody that will take this stellar individual as one of their own. So I thought about it, and I looked at the at my potential clients, and we came up with one. And I went back to the ambassador. I said, please go in, make the best case. And then we were going to throw in all kinds of, benefits into the deal. All kind of assistance programs, this kind and the other. So our ambassador went in, and yes, the president of the country made an executive decision that they would take this individual, but they would only take this individual if the individual indicated legally that they were doing this voluntarily, because you guys know it's a very sensitive issue that we take people and put them on planes and forcibly eject them, So they wanted all kinds of conditions, and they wanted to know, okay, so is this person employable? Yes, this person's very employable. They have a whole set of skills, but they may not be the kind of skills that you want, So we had to figure out a way that how this person would be kept. So all of the various agencies in Washington, we got together, and the deadline was coming up because this person was going to be liberated. This was like on a Tuesday, and the person was going to be put out on the street on Saturday. And working night and day, we came up with a list of options for the country, and the country was very happy with the options. And Saturday, the gentleman is released, put on a plane takes off, and he is offloaded, and now he is happily residing in that particular country and is receiving a monthly stipend. His family can visit him, but he's not allowed to travel outside of the country. And the country decided to not offer him employment, although his kind of skills and knowing the country, he may end up very well working for them. So that was another case. And I'll give you guys one more, because this one was a mess. This one was an absolute mess. There is a huge dispute over the Nile between the countries of Ethiopia, Sudan, and Egypt. And for the longest period of time, it was United States policy to try to stay out of it and to be absolutely neutral. That worked until one day, President Sisi of Egypt dials up President Trump of the United States. And President Sisi tells President Trump, all the Ethiopians are being a horrendous pain. We can't make any headway on these negotiations. They're going to build this dam, which we came to call the dam in the State Department. And they're going to, and for Egypt, it's an existential threat. If Ethiopia takes one drop of water out of the Nile, this can't be. President Trump really liked President Sisi of Egypt. So President Trump tells President Sisi, of course, the United States is with you. We will support you. We will punish Ethiopia if they don't agree to, negotiated settlement on the dam. Now, sitting in President Trump's office when he got this phone call, Secretary of Treasury Mnuchin. And so President Trump turns to Secretary Mnuchin after the phone call and says, you're responsible for resolving this issue. Now, not the best thing to have the Secretary of Treasury dealing with a very sensitive, complicated foreign policy issue. But I am thankful that it wasn't the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development who was not sitting in the office at the time, because then I have no doubt that President Trump would have charged that person with doing it. So what happens next is Secretary Mnuchin does his best. They call the three governments to Washington. The United States, which, as I said, heretofore had been very objective and neutral amongst all three sides, it becomes very apparent that the United States now is fully on Egypt's side. And Secretary Mnuchin basically hands an ultimatum to the Ethiopians to say, this is the deal, sign it or suffer the consequences. Of course, they don't sign it. And as a result, President Trump decides to cut Ethiopia's foreign aid significantly. Well, when Congress hears this, they go ballistic. They go absolutely ballistic. And a bunch of members of Congress called and immediately wanted somebody from the State Department to go down and explain what's going on. So who gets to go? I get to go. And I have to explain a policy that, number one, I don't support, I don't believe in, and I don't understand. But aside from that, it was easy. Ethiopia, of course, is a very proud country. Nobody is going to make Ethiopians do something they don't want to do. And trying to blackmail them by cutting their assistance has just the opposite effect, as those of us who know Ethiopia knew it would. They say, well, you don't want to know what they said, but basically, no, it made everything worse, made everything much worse. And right now, the Biden folks are trying to kind of recover from that. They've gone back to a much more even-handed approach. But of course, it didn't achieve, the objectives it was going to achieve. All it did was get members of Congress even angrier at the administration, and just increase the animosity. And of course, in Washington, all of the groups, except for the White House, which really matters, but all the groups really went ballistic because they saw this as underhanded, unfair, not playing the US's traditional role of being a neutral party in these kinds of disputes. So, those kinds of things come up all the time. I gave you some of the more dramatic ones, but my bottom line on this thing, guys, if you want to make Washington work and participate in that, go and be a staffer, because they're the ones who have all the power. The words coming out of those people's mouths that you see on television, they are provided by somebody who's in their 20s or 30s that's giving them all that information. And with that, I will stop and open it up for comments, questions, anything else you might have. Michael, I'll leave it to you.
All right, first things first, I'm going to turn on the ability to start video and unmute. So first, do we have any questions from the audience?
I appreciate your talk, Ambassador Nagy. Appreciate all you've done for international studies at Texas Tech over the years. My question would be, probably face more often than divisiveness or differences of opinion would be indifference in regard to Africa in particular. So is that so that people with limited time and attention spans are going to put that pretty low on the
Yeah, John, you're right on. Here's the deal, though. Yes, there's only 24 hours a day, even in Washington. You can only deal with so many issues. And the neat thing is, when Africa is kind of under the radar, you have a lot more freedom than to do your own policies. Whereas, say, my counterpart in the Middle East, the only decision he made every day was what pair of pants to put on. Because beyond that, it was, the White House who was driving that policy, or somebody else. So with Africa, because there was benign neglect, and the African group in Washington, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, they all know each other and they work together. Like the people who are coming in with the Biden administration, I've known them forever, and I don't consider them, adversaries at all. So we could get a lot of things done. The problem was when Africa intersected one of these other issues that were of greater importance to the White House. For example, if there was an Israeli connection, then of course that would take priority over the other aspects of that issue. Or for example, when the president decided he wanted to pull all US forces out of Africa. And the Pentagon, they can offer options. And as you well know, the Pentagon can slow things down when they want to slow things down. But, the White House basically did not give them the option, said, we want US forces out of Somalia in 3 weeks. And for the Pentagon, 3 weeks, that's not even a coffee break. So, but they, in that case, they had to move. So whenever the president did focus on Africa, it caused an awful lot of turbulence. But for 80% of the stuff we were able to make some very, very important decisions impacting Africa. So you know, but yeah, you're right. But I'd rather have it that way.
All right, next question will be for Emmanuel. Go ahead and unmute yourself and ask your question.
Well, I guess good afternoon is in order, or good evening. It's already nightfall here in Nigeria. I want to appreciate the ambassador for his very detailed analysis of the Nigerian government's response to the kidnapping situation in last year, October. It was indeed quite a news here in Nigeria, of course. The government got a lot of backlash for that. But I have a series of questions on the US policy towards Nigeria's, especially our issue of insecurity as it relates to weapons procurement. It would be noticed under the Jonathan's administration that the US had issues with relating to ethnic conflicts, and the US was skeptical about selling weapons to Nigerian government. There was a blockade in South Africa. There was a blockade in Israel. There was also the US refusal to sell Nigerian government weapons. How has this relationship developed, and how is the Biden administration going to respond to this? Secondly, is due to new situations that have now arisen in Nigeria, especially on some media exposés that have exposed even some members of the Buhari's administration and indicted them of extremist views and, of course, activities. What is the US government's response to all of this happening in Nigeria?
Okay, my
Thank
friend, I
you.
have to tell you, I'm no longer speaking on behalf of the US government, thank goodness, but I can tell you about the armaments. You know, and that doesn't matter what the administration is, because it's the same for both. For the United States to provide weapons to another country, they have to go through a number of very, very careful inspections and analysis to make sure that the people who end up with the weapons have not been accused of human rights violations. You know, that's Leahy vetting. That's even for the simplest weapon systems, but then for the more complicated ones, and you probably know that one of the things we were selling Nigeria were the Super Tucano aircraft. For that, you know, we have to do that as a package. You can't just give anybody a weapon system and not make sure that they're trained on how to use it, that there's spare parts, and again, the people who would be using it pass all the vetting. So I remember 2016, when I was briefly in Nigeria, we were already working on selling the aircraft, and it's just now, I don't know if they've just been delivered or they will be delivered soon, but we know that Nigeria desperately needs the aircraft in their fight against ISIS West Africa and Boko Haram. So hopefully that the aircraft will be in the battle soon. But you know, we have to be very, very careful on the weapons, because the human rights constituency in the United States is extremely, extremely influential, and all US administrations are very sensitive to making sure that we are not the ones providing weapons to the people who are blatantly committing human rights violations. So I'll leave it at that. As far as your second question, that requires an administration question. And as I said, I'm thankfully no longer, you know, an administration spokesperson. But thanks so much for phoning in. Are you in Lagos or Abuja? Where are you?
I'm in Lagos. I'm presently in Lagos.
Oh, very good. Love Lagos. Take care.
Thank you.
Right here.
It seems like me and someone in the chat with my question. How does someone go from being a political science undergrad to a staffer somewhere like the State
Oh,
Department?
wow. Hey, listen, State Department has internships. Congress has internships. I would highly recommend doing one of those internships. You know, there are different kinds. Most of them are unpaid. Some of the internships the State Department does at embassies are paid, or at least you will get housing and, you know, or other types of benefits. But I would highly recommend try one of those. But, you know, then you can work through your members of Congress, because in Congress, the congressional individual offices have staffers, but then the various committees also have their own staffers. And when power changes, like, you know, recently the power shifted from the Republican to the Democrats in the Senate, but the people on the Africa portion of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, they're careerists. They're there for the long term, and they really know their subject matter. And like I said, my point of view, you can be a heck of a lot more influential as a staffer than as a member.
Let me add something about Tibor. Are you a student?
Yes.
So Texas Tech University actually has a legislative staffers program. Are you aware of that? So look into that. The
Yeah.
president's office actually manages a legislative staffing program where every year we send a group of students, undergraduate students, sometimes graduate students from Texas Tech. It's a very rigorous selection process, but they select a few.
Thank you so much. Anybody else?
Phoning in from Lagos is the incoming students, graduate student here.
Good. Sound like a sharp person.
Is that right? What are the most hopeful developments that you saw in the last 4 years in Africa in terms of leadership or in terms of social movements, or what did you see that really kind of you thought is heading in the right direction for Africa, given that so much of the news we get from Africa?
I'll be honest with you, the young people, because these old folks that are 3 times as old as their constituents are going to die. And hopefully with them will go a lot of corruption and elitism and nepotism and tribalism and, you know, all those other awfulisms that they have nurtured since African independence. And the young people are totally different, totally different. And I have full faith and confidence that they're going to really take Africa in a different direction.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I missed this morning's session. How would you characterize the difference between the State Department working with the Trump White House as opposed to Biden's?
Oh my gosh, I went through that. I did the whole thing on that this morning. State Department's fine working with anybody. You know, that's the bottom line. The career foreign service is great. I mean, every once in a while you get hit with an issue that viscerally you are so upset about that you're going to say, I'm out of here. But that doesn't happen very often. And even with the Trump administration, I mean, he did a lot of stuff that presidents don't normally do. And most of the folks just hung in there and, you know, they dealt with it. And a lot of people had problems with Secretary Pompeo, but, you know, I found him to be really extremely hardworking. He worked 20 hours a day. He got a grasp of the issues. Great instincts on what things he could change the president's mind on. So the career foreign service does well. And the Biden administration is going to dramatically increase the numbers of US diplomats. So young people who are thinking of diplomacy as a career, this is a great time to come in because there are going to be a heck of a lot more job openings.
What was interesting was the emphasis they were placing on prisoners overseas,
Yeah.
things like that. And it seemed like it was effective.
Yeah, it was a huge issue. I mean, there are a couple of Americans still missing in other places, and you know, there was always emphasis put on that. I mean, you know, for President Trump, that was an issue of the heart. He was absolutely adamant about that. That if there's an American citizen who's a hostage anywhere, that the country will spare no effort or expenses to get that person back.
Is that continuing?
Ask the new White House.
Mr. Ambassador, I'm gonna inquire, I'm going to invite one more question on here. We're
Okay.
just about out of time.
Yeah, and I got to get ready for the next thing.
Jared, go ahead and unmute, ask your question. This will be the last question.
All right, you saved the best for last. Sir, thank you so much for speaking today. I mean, you know, you're a fascinating individual and your stories sound like straight out of a Tom Clancy novel. I love it. But so being that your work primarily occurs in Africa, and although you're no longer affiliated with the speaking for the government, I didn't know what you thought personally was the greatest geopolitical threat on the African continent to the United States that's may not really be being talked about, in your opinion, sir.
Well, that's a great one. You know, for me, the rise of extremist groups that's even going on now, that and how they're extending their territory is going to be a danger to the homeland in a not too distant future. But for me, the biggest threat on the African continent that is not being spoken of specifically are the inroads that China is making when it comes to their port access, military bases, key contracts and infiltrating their people into positions of influence. So for the US existentially, I would say that the China threat is much more serious, and it is definitely going to be there for a long time. Thanks very much for the question.
All right, let's all
Thanks.
give Ambassador Nagy a great round of applause.
Thanks a lot for coming on. Sat through two of these. Thanks a lot. Deeds.